The elevator doors closed, and the man beside me smiled like he owned the world. He didn't know me. He didn't know my name. He had seen me for 2 minutes, hair frozen to my collar, a hospital bracelet peeling from my wrist, a newborn bundled against my chest, and he leaned in and said, quietly, as if to himself, "Everything is yours." That was the line everyone would clip and share. That was the image the papers would run. A billionaire in a brass-buttoned suit handing a life to a stranger between floors 5 and 6. But if you want to know why he did it, you need to go back 3 days to a hospital room where my life was supposed to begin. 3 days before the elevator, I was in a glass room that smelled like antiseptic and lavender lotion, holding Luna for the first time, listening to the small, perfect noises a newborn makes, thinking the worst was over. Brandon, my husband, had been pacing outside, checking his watch, smiling at visitors. The family, Helena, his mother, with her red lipstick and colder hands, Gregory Kingston, the patriarch, who let his power do the talking, Natasha, the sister, with a following and a knack for performance, came with trays and congratulations and a dozen cameras disguised as phones. They wanted a picture. They wanted a line in their story. The proud family, secure, the heir secured. What happened next didn't happen in secret. It happened in front of monitors, recorded in the hospital's hallway cameras, spread across a dozen phones. They cornered me at the threshold of my recovery. Helena's smile had an edge to it. Natasha's arm brushed Luna and then didn't let go. There was talk, casual, practiced, about how a baby would complicate my career, how bloodlines mattered, how a child would be better off without me. When I protested, Brandon's hand was gentle on the outside and relentless on the inside. He produced papers, a document he insisted I sign. "Just a signature for insurance men," he said. "It protects us." It was a stack of forms, but there was one sheet they refused to let me read. A nurse came in and, in the confusion of contractions and sedation and fatigue, they steered my pen. They forged my future on that page. They forged Luna's future. The forged document claimed paternity questions, allegations that made no sense, and a supposedly conclusive DNA test that didn't exist. The next morning, Instagram exploded with a staged video, me caught in a lie with my truth supposedly exposed. Natasha's followers numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Her caption framed me as reckless, unfit, unstable. The comments piled like snow. I remember the way the snow looked when they threw us out. Not a poetic snow, just cold, gray, cruel. They bundled Luna into a blanket and into a car that pulled away from the hospital like a prosecutor removing evidence. Brandon closed the trunk with a click that sounded like a verdict. Helena watched from the curb. Gregory watched from the window, detached. They had arranged everything so carefully, callous as choreography. We were left at a bus stop 2 miles from the city in a blizzard that felt personal. My shoes were hospital slippers. Luna's face was the size of my palm, warm and trusting. I wrapped her in my jacket and walked until my legs refused. Somewhere between the last streetlight and the first numbness, I sat down on the curb and put my forehead against her head and thought, they will stop when they think I am gone. They had intended to make me invisible. They had intended to erase the risk I represented to their fortunes and to their social brand. But they miscalculated one thing. I was a mother, and mothers do not bow easily to the equation other people write for their children's lives. 2 days of fevered survival followed. Someone found us on the steps of a charity clinic, the kind of place the wealthy glance at with the same discomfort they feel for truths that reflect on them. A man in a navy coat asked if we were all right. He said he had a car, he had warmth, he had a voice that was both impatient and somehow kind. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, a lawyer. He was not the kind of man to make idle promises. He had clarity about papers and wills and power of attorney. He looked at Luna, then at me, and the world tilted. He told me that a man named William Chen had been watching for a while. A quiet man, he told me. He likes to know the truth about people before he invests in them. Mr. Harrison said William had been my grandfather, on paper, and a strange link none of us had spoken about. He said William had watched my life from afar, and that when he learned how his grandson's family behaved, how they had treated a new mother, he had acted. He doesn't like cruelty, Mr. Harrison said. He prefers to correct it. At first, I thought it was a kindness dressed in legalese. I thought perhaps Mr. Harrison was offering a loan or introducing me to a foundation. Then he put his hand on a folder and opened it. The folder contained a will. It contained signatures and notarized statements and an executor's order. It contained a clause that named Min, my given name, as the primary beneficiary of a trust. It named Luna as a secondary. It said something else. Assets to be made available immediately upon confirmation of identity and physical custody. It required documentation, process, verification, legal steps that would take time. So when people later trimmed the moment into 50-second clips, Billionaire gives fortune to stranger in elevator, they were compressing a week of legal choreography into a single cinematic beat. For dramatic clarity, I'll say it plainly now. The elevator moment condensed legal steps. William Chen had signed his intentions. Mr. Harrison was the bridge between that intention and the world. The trust did exist. The law existed. But the elevator? That minute in brass and mirror space was the place William chose to make the declaration public, to remove all doubt. It was both a flourish and a weapon. In the hospital lobby a week later, while Brandon laughed into his phone about his victory, I started reading the world like a ledger. Anger settled into me like a currency I could invest. Rage was not the plan. Rage was the fuel. I called lawyers, real ones, people with gray hair and sterner offices who smelled of coffee and case law. I called investigators. I started a list of grievances that read like a litany: forged signatures, falsified or non-existent DNA tests, undue influence on a vulnerable patient. Each line on that list was a promise that I would not be quiet. The first months were a blur of small legal victories that felt like laying foundation stones. I couldn't move at the speed of instant revenge. These things moved on paper and through servers and through courts, but I could move strategically. I spent mornings learning how corporate boards were structured and afternoons watching the family's companies, little empires of restaurant chains, real estate, and social clubs, tick like machines. I hired forensic accountants who look at numbers the way some people read faces. They found irregular loans, offshore creditors, shell companies set up to move money like chess pieces. I bought what I could afford, small positions in unassuming companies tied to the family's cash flow. It wasn't about owning their yachts. It was about owning the pillars under them. When you are declared a beneficiary of billions, people assume you start buying headlines. I started buying debt. There is a blunt power in debt, an obligation that becomes leverage when timed correctly. I quietly acquired notes, bought distressed assets that belonged to trusts controlled by the family, and placed myself where a default could trigger clauses no one wanted. I made friends with bankers who understood the geometry of leverage. I made enemies who wrote me off as sentimental and naive. That was useful. Underestimation is a resource. But money alone would not do this. The law would. Evidence would. The public would. For every financial move, I readied an evidentiary hammer. Emails that proved Helena had pressured nurses, records showing a DNA sample chain that had no proper custody, surveillance footage of anonymous goons tailing me the night I was forced into a car. I hired a young hacker, a legal consultant with a conscience, who helped pull data from social accounts and backups that showed Natasha's staged posts were coordinated with an agency the family paid. We had ledgers in purple ink, we had phone logs, we had receipts. And we had Cassandra, or as she called herself in our files, Candy Thompson, the angle of the scheme. Cassandra was the paid actress who had posed as an old friend in the hospital corridor, planted questions, whispered rumors. She had worked for the family until she had decided it was more profitable to play both sides. When she realized I had documentation and a lawyer who didn't hesitate to call her bluff, she flipped. Her testimony was the brittle final straw of the public record. She told investigators about payments, scripts, and a cleanup operation designed to make the scandal believable and permanent. We moved carefully. We served Helena with discovery requests. We subpoenaed correspondence. We sent notices that made the family lawyers sit up. They countered with cease and desists and insinuations in the press. Natasha posted videos about safety and truth, framing herself as a victim of smear. Gregory Kingston hired a PR firm that knew how to turn outrage into sympathy. They were all professionals at self-preservation. So was I. There were nights I could not sleep, counting the costs of every decision. There were mornings Luna woke and anchored me to a reality that had nothing to do with online metrics or boardroom leverage. I learned to detach my two lives, the one I built for her, a nursery with soft light and a kettle that sings, and the one that was a war room across from a downtown law library where partners in thrift suits pored over ledgers like priests over scripture. I didn't make that separation to become cold. I made it to be effective. Violence was never the answer. The law was. As our case grew, so did the eyes watching. The more we demanded disclosure, the more Natasha posted. The more she posted, the more the public saw cracks. Her followers noticed stale captions and subtle edits. Some began to question. Influencers, even mercenary ones, leave trails. A journalist friend of mine, someone who had once eaten at Gregory Kingston's restaurants and now loved the truth more than a free meal, picked up the scent. He dug until he found a bank transfer. The bank clerk, embarrassed, confirmed a wire that lined up with Cassandra's explanation. The headline came, "Paid Silence?" That headline did something the subpoenas couldn't. It made the public keep watching. It made advertisers blanch. It made Gregory's board question the value of his name. Boards are rational in a way families are not. If a celebrity scandal threatens revenue, corporate decisions are sudden and swift. Suddenly, the Kingston holdings looked like vulnerable flesh. Banks surveyed their exposure. Lenders asked for guarantees. That is when the debt I had quietly purchased began to matter. Those positions gave me a voice at the table. The week of the exhibition, the week I planned my reveal, I spent dressing the way I had always meant to dress, like someone who belongs to a room. It was a simple decision. A tailored coat the color of wet asphalt, hair pinned back, Luna strapped into a carrier that kept her close and calm. I thought about what would be most dislocating to them. Would it be my presence, my confidence, or the fact that I controlled the means by which their empire could be taken down? I wanted all of it. The meeting was scheduled at the Chin Kingston Tower, an office owned by a trust that had, until then, looked untouchable. They expected a routine hearing, an executor's reading, a performance of polite grief, the family in its usual center. They did not expect the elevator. I chose the elevator because of its intimacy. Glass doors and mirrored walls make people small in their own reflections. It's a place where you can't hide behind speeches. They were already nervous. Natasha tapping her phone, Helena smoothing a skirt that had been ironed by a woman who never thought there would be consequences. Brandon, like a man watching his facade crack, checked his watch and entered with a swagger that looked like guilt in a suit. William Chen stepped in beside me. He was quieter than I had imagined. He had a voice that made the elevator feel like a confessional, as if everyone were there to speak truths that only pulsed in the chest. He looked at Luna and then at me. He didn't introduce himself in the way the tabloids told it, no fireworks, no cameras blaring, but he did something equally effective. He made the intent explicit. "This child," he said, "and the woman who protects her are not for sale." He reached into his inside pocket and handed me a slim envelope. It was not the will. The law requires time and process for that. But the envelope contained something the press loved to clip: a notarized affidavit with his signature, a public declaration of intent to transfer assets to me, and the authorization for Mr. Harrison, the executor, to act immediately to secure my position pending legal formalities. In the elevator, between floors, he said the words that would be replayed: "Everything is yours." A dozen things happened at once, compressed into seconds. Natasha's phone fell out of her hand, Brandon's nostrils flared, Helena's painted mask slid toward anger, Gregory's face lost the carefully cultivated shade of control. The mirrored walls took them and multiplied them, and for the first time I saw their faces as someone else might, raw, stripped of the nice frames they had used for years. The camera that took that moment, the one that gave it life on feeds, was not planted by me. It was a security camera in the lobby that anyone could have access to. Someone had left their phone on record. The clip of William handing me the envelope and saying those words landed on every platform within an hour. It was short, almost boring, but context was everything. When the affidavit was posted online by Mr. Harrison alongside the surveillance footage of the hospital ambush, the story took on legal form. The affidavit promised assets, the footage supplied motive and intent. That's the key detail people miss. The elevator was a stage, but the stage had wings. Behind it were subpoenas, affidavits, records, and a lawyer who knew when to move. The affidavit allowed Mr. Harrison to issue immediate orders, freeze transfers, prevent asset stripping, initiate emergency audits. He had the legal authority to stop the very maneuvers the Kingston family had been planning. He did. The reaction from the family was theatrical defeat. Gregory's companies saw stock drops, boards convened in panic and removed him from leadership roles pending investigation. Lenders put calls into their counsel. Natasha lost advertising deals as brands moved away from controversy. Helena found herself subpoenaed and photographed leaving courthouses, not as a goddess, but as an accused participant. Brandon's signature on the forged paper became a story in itself. Cassandra, testifying for immunity, spilled the details of the strategy that had been meant to make me vanish. But I did not relish their fall. There is a hunger in every narrative that can be misread for bloodthirst. I denied that hunger. I wanted something else: to secure Luna, to correct what had been broken, and to put resources where they mattered. After the elevator footage, I walked into hearings with Mr. Harrison at my side. We presented evidence methodically: the forged chain of custody for the DNA sample, the bank transfers to Cassandra, the documented pattern of undue influence in medical settings. We did not shout. We did not theatrically drop documents at people's feet. We let the courtroom do its work. Justice, when it runs on procedure, is painfully slow, but when it moves, it has a weight that cannot be ignored. There were arrests. Cassandra's cooperation led to charges against operatives contracted by the family for falsifying records. Helena faced obstruction of justice indictments. Corporate boards replaced directors. Creditors placed liens. Gregory's personal assets were frozen until liabilities were resolved. I watched it happen with an odd clinical grief. I had lost a marriage and gained legal complicatedness. I had been humiliated in the snow and now watched dignity restore itself, not by any single blow, but by the slow accumulation of truth. I will not pretend money fixed everything. I spent the fortune when it came deliberately. I did not buy mansions just to prove a point. I bought safety, security for Luna, lawyers who would stand guard, a foundation for mothers in crisis that did not have to beg for crumbs. I funded shelters that took women and children off the streets and into therapy and training programs. I invested in legal clinics that taught victims how to secure their own evidence. I created scholarships. Every public announcement was careful. Every donation was strategic. My revenge, if that is the word you want to use, was redistribution. I took what a man had left me and put it into places where it could make the fate of another woman different from mine. I turned an inheritance into a shield and a tool. That is the moral I want you to take. Power used to protect is not the same as power used to destroy. There were consequences I did not anticipate. Natasha lost followers, not because people hate spectacle, but because once you see someone do harm intentionally, the illusion cracks. She tried to apologize in videos that no one believed. Brandon tried to come to me with offers to work things out that read like confessions written by a man who had been moved by court orders. He wanted custody arrangements to be negotiated behind polished doors. I refused. I had no interest in letting the architects of my humiliation rewrite the ending in private. Instead, I wrote a public one. The foundation awarded funds to a program for mothers who had been forced into homelessness. I set up legal aid clinics that help women secure evidence and file emergency orders. I made a point of hiring women who had been through similar experiences to run these programs. It was not charity theater, it was reparative economics. There is an image that people like to freeze frame. Me in the elevator, Luna asleep in the sling, an old man handing me a slip of paper and changing my life. It is dramatic, and it is true in the sense that the man existed and he acted. But what that moment doesn't show are the thousands of decisions that made it meaningful. The lawyers who refused to be intimidated, the investigators who tracked transfers, the journalists who thought truth worth the risk, the small, brutal choices I made when I could have chosen despair. It doesn't show the days I fed Luna and we sat wrapped in a blanket, reading children's books while my phone buzzed with subpoenas. It doesn't show the nights I learned to speak corporate language or the mornings I counted cash flows. Power is not a single event. It is the accumulation of choices aligned with consequences. The elevator made a great headline. The work that followed made it durable. When the dust settled, I stood in front of the first shelter we opened and watched a woman come in with a child. She had the same look I once had, fearful, exhausted, and furious. She gripped my hand as if it were a raft. She said, "I saw you in the news," and in her voice was relief that someone else had cut a path through the throng. That's why I gave back. The grandeur of the elevator moment meant little if it didn't mean safety for someone else. As for Luna, she learned to chase light through curtains and to clap when a song comes on. She is a child of a complicated history and of deliberate protection. She knows that her mother does not let injustice stand unchallenged. She also knows how to bake a perfect mistake-laden cake that we both laugh about. She pulls me out of strategy sessions with a single look, and I am happiest when I am reduced to being her mother and nothing more. People ask if I feel vindicated when Gregory's name is replaced on building plaques or when Helena avoids cameras. They ask if I sleep better because the world has corrected itself. I sleep the way the exhausted sleep, in blocks, and with an awareness that cruelty can reconfigure the world quickly if we let it. My sleep improved because I built a life where Luna could be safe, and because I found the moral courage to use what was given to me to change things for others. There is a final thing I want you to remember about the elevator. because it is easy to reduce events to a single cinematic moment and forget the scaffolding behind them. William Chen did not hand me billions because he liked my face. He acted because he saw cruelty and decided to break the chain that empowered it. Mr. Harrison did not deliver an envelope to dramatize a story. He moved legal levers designed to prevent asset erosion. I did not become powerful overnight. I learned where the weak points in a system were, and I used lawful tools to secure them. That is the template, not for imitation of revenge, but for a kind of accountable power. Align resources, evidence, and the public record. If there is advice in this story, it is this: dignity demands action, and action requires patience and law. When someone tries to write you out of the story of your child's life, fight with documents, with testimony, and with people who will swear to the truth. Build alliances with anyone willing to stand by the facts. Use the system that protects property and person to hold accountable those who exploit proximity and power. And when you are fortunate enough to recover, aim to redistribute what you keep so someone else will not have to survive what you did. I walk past the Chen Kingston Tower sometimes with Luna on my hip. We don't go there as victors seeking spectacle. We go because life continues in the shadow of every great building. When we pass the brass doors, she waves at strangers. I watch her and remember the cold night on the curb and the hand that reached out. I remember the stack of papers Mr. Harrison showed me and the time it took to make them mean something. If that elevator moment made a Billionaire headline, it was because it revealed that an old man could still be disgusted by cruelty and choose to act. But the truth I want to leave you with is this: the story's muscle was built in the slow, unglamorous work after the doors closed. Screenwriters love a single stroke that changes everything. Real life prefers drafts. If this story matters to you, if comeback and accountability and the transformation of pain into protection matter, then do something small. Subscribe. There are more stories like this, and in every one, there are lessons about where power goes and who it protects. I will close with what my mother taught me when I was very small and shivering in a house that could not keep heat and could not keep promises. Keep your hands ready, not to strike, but to build. That is what I did. That is what I do. And that is why, when an elevator closed and a man said, "Everything is yours," it was not the ending of my story, but the pivot where the work began. Like if you think justice looks better when it protects somebody else, subscribe for more stories of people who turn loss into armor.